If you watched my culture shock video back in Scotland and you're expecting something similar to that, this is not that video. Usually culture shock videos, people talk about like the really fun culture shocks, but this one I want to talk about the 3 really serious culture shocks that I've experienced so far in Japan. Hi everyone! Sonnie here coming at you from Fukuoka, Japan. Before I get too in-depth with this, I do want to say that I've only been in Japan for about 10 months now, but in that time I've worked at 3 different junior high schools and a college, and we've made friends with locals in both cities, the 2 different cities that we've lived in here, and I have done a ton of research on this topic as well. So yes, these are my personal 3 biggest culture shocks, but from everything that I've researched, it seems like these 3 culture shocks are not something that I've experienced alone. So if you have moved to Japan, let me know in the comments below if you experienced any of these too. And I've chosen to focus simply on the 3 biggest culture shocks that I've experienced, so that way I have more time to explain a little bit more about them. Number 1. Cheating. Before I came to Japan, I've heard stereotypical things about how Japanese men cheat on women. And then I've also heard that that has been slowly changing with the younger generation. So coming to Japan, I didn't really know what to expect with this one. The first time that we were exposed to this, we were out to dinner with a few of our friends that are around our age. All of them happened to be male. However, they had mentioned that while you shouldn't cheat on your girlfriend, that once she becomes your wife, it's perfectly acceptable to sleep with other people because you made that commitment to her, she's your wife, you're fine. I don't get the logic really, honestly. I'm still trying to grasp that one because in America, it seems to be quite the opposite. If you're cheating on somebody and they're only your boyfriend and they're only your girlfriend, I mean, it's bad, but it's not as bad as having an affair on someone. So that one really confused me, but I started doing some more research on this, and then the second time that this came up, Joe and I had gone to an enkai with some of the teachers and principal and people from my school in Okayama, and one of the male teachers was really excited to meet Joe, and he and I had a really good relationship at school together, and so I was really surprised when we're sitting at dinner and we're having sake and we're having sashimi and great conversation, and he found out that Joe and I have been married for almost 5 years now. In August, it'll be 5 years. So he, right in front of me, he told Joe that it's perfectly fine for Joe to sleep with other women, and why hasn't he? And then he proceeded to say that, you know, if he and I went out to go drinking together, we couldn't have as much fun as if Joe and he went out drinking together and then maybe went to a soapland or something together, which is like Japanese prostitution here. And I'm sitting there and Joe is like holding my hand, and he's like, I don't want to sleep with other women. And once again, you know, our friends at dinner, and this guy said, you know, well, men have needs, so you should go to a soapland, to a prostitute, or whatever. Oh my goodness, it was so shocking. And what was also shocking was the fact that he didn't seem to think that there was anything wrong with saying this right in front of me. So I ended up doing some research on this, and from what I've found, it turns out that women cheat on men just as much as men cheat on women. And I'd like to take a moment to say not all Japanese people cheat, but this does seem to be kind of a common thing in this culture. I've also heard stories of married and unmarried salarymen here in Japan that go out after work and will go to these soaplands that provide multiple different services, but one is involving nudity and tongues and can be done in a group setting. It's not the whole situation. But anyway, I can't go into detail about that because I will lose my monetization on this. So if you want more information about prostitution in Japan, I would actually enjoy doing a video about that. So comment below and let me know if you would be interested in that too. So I did some research on it and I've linked some stuff below if you want to see from Japanese people's opinions and interviews with them about cheating and their thoughts about it. So check out those links below if you want more information about that. Number 2, technology, or more specifically, the lack thereof, as well as the lack of overall understanding about technology. So if you've never been to Japan, you might have this image in your head about how Japan is futuristic and they have robots and they have, you know, all of these brand new cutting edge technology. Or maybe you've just been to Tokyo for a few days and you haven't actually lived and worked here. The lack of technology is completely shocking. The primary way for them to send documents to one another is not to scan and email it, for example. No, they still use fax machines. And I mean, we've seen them in like every restaurant that we've gone to. We use them at our schools. Every place has a fax machine, and that's just the way that most business is conducted here. Fax machines aside, one of my teachers doesn't even have email. At a lot of Japanese schools, you're not allowed to use a USB. They think that you're going to give the entire system a virus. At one of Joe's schools, if he was able to use a USB, he first had to plug it into a machine to test that it didn't have any viruses before he was then allowed to put it into the school's computer. Pretty much all the Japanese people that I've worked with use Yahoo search instead of Google. The kids at our school seem to have a shocking lack of understanding when it comes to computers. If we bring them into the computer lab and they have to type up a report, this might be due to the fact that they are used to tablets or something instead of computers, so it might be a generation thing, but they really didn't know how to use the computers. A lot of people here still have flip phones. It goes on and on and on. It's just a little bit shocking to me. Number 3, tattoos. This one by far was the biggest culture shock for me and the one that affects me the most directly. I can live without modern technology. It's a bit of a hassle in school not being able to email some of my teachers or having to use a fax machine again. And I know that Joe isn't going to go to a soapland or start cheating on me, but the tattoo culture here in Japan actually affects my day-to-day life. I knew that tattoos were frowned upon, but when I watched a lot of other YouTube videos about coming to Japan with tattoos, I do personally feel like a lot of it is downplayed, and I don't think that that's beneficial for anyone. From what other YouTubers have said, I knew, or I thought that I knew, that people would know we're not part of the Yakuza, our tattoos are the fashionable kinds of tattoos, and therefore we're the exception to the rule. And we're outside of that culture that Japanese people are not allowed to have tattoos, but that we would be okay having tattoos because of the difference in culture. However, I found that that is not in any way the case here. I think if you're a full-time YouTuber, your perspective is going to be much different about Japan, and nobody wants to focus on negative things, and nobody wants to make a country that they love potentially sound bad in any way, which I don't think that this does, but I can understand why people might avoid speaking realistically on this topic. Another thing is, if you're a full-time YouTuber and you're not teaching here or you're not working in an office environment or anything like that, this is most likely not going to affect you that much. If you're just a tourist visiting, this is not going to affect you that much either. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, it's very easy in other videos to just say, don't worry about it. They know that you're not the Yakuza. You can come here with tattoos and everybody's fine and nobody will judge you. But if you're living here, if you're working here, especially if you're working with kids, that's not the case at all. And so I want to have a real dialogue about this situation. So from my perspective, as an English teacher here, I have to keep my tattoos covered anytime that I'm leaving the apartment. Even if I'm going on the balcony, I really am supposed to keep them covered, or I can lose my job. Another ALT that I know of actually lived and worked in the same city, in the same school for 3 years and had this amazing relationship with everybody. And then one day he was hanging up his laundry outside on his own balcony and he didn't cover up his shoulder tattoo. And unluckily for him, a man who worked for his school's Board of Education happened to be walking by and saw his tattoo. He received a call the next day telling him not to go back into work and that his company was going to have to move him to not only a different school, but an entirely different city in another part of Japan where hopefully nobody would know that he had a tattoo. We have been warned repeatedly that this could happen to us. Japanese people will not openly shame you or anything like that if you have a tattoo. If you're a tourist, they do know that the culture is different, but they won't want you around their children with tattoos. Joe and I started jokingly talking about tattoos or mentioning tattoos to people that we knew or in school or something like that, and we noticed a pattern forming around that dialogue. When I stamped one of my students' hands instead of their papers so that they would feel like cool and special that it's on their hand and they thought it was really funny, I jokingly said to them, "Oh, now you have a tattoo." And they went, no tattoo, no tattoo. No. And I was like, whoa. Like, that was a severe reaction to me, but it kept happening over and over again. When Joe went to karaoke with some ALT friends, apparently the culture in the Philippines is very similar to the culture in Japan, because Joe thought if you're in a private karaoke room with just other ALTs that he could take off the sleeve that he wears and that you've seen me wear to cover up our arms and feel more comfortable and everything. But one of the girls from the Philippines looked at it and said to him, "Only bad people have tattoos." And that's really still part of the culture here as well. Back in the Edo period, back before the Edo period, I believe as well, tattoos were used on criminals. If you were a thief, you would get a ring around your arm. The thing is, though, that if you did a really bad crime like murder, you were then put to death. So it was just the minute crimes that you would get tattoos, but they became synonymous with criminals. And then the Yakuza began to build upon them and create these amazing works of tattooed arts all over their bodies. And it just kind of provoked that stereotype more and more and more. If you have a tattoo, you're a criminal. It doesn't necessarily have to be murder or something like that. It could be something minor, but that correlation has not broken. At the college that Joe and I teach at, we have these assistant teachers that are Japanese students who are studying education, and so they're trying to develop those teaching skills and those experiences, so they're working alongside of us. And we've developed good relationships with them. So a couple of weeks ago, I had mentioned to my assistant and in front of Joe's assistant, and Joe was there as well, that next week we'll be teaching them about different phrases and things that you can use while you're traveling and different culture experiences. And I personally wanted to mention that a lot of foreigners have tattoos, and it doesn't mean they're a criminal and it doesn't mean that they're a bad person, because a lot of my students want to travel abroad. But the looks on those two assistants' faces, yeah, they got really quiet and kind of nodded. And because Japanese people are so polite and because they don't want to ever say anything controversial, that's kind of usually the worst reaction, unless someone's like really drunk, that you're gonna get from somebody. So we quickly changed the subject and dropped it. However, in that next class, I did ask the students who did a homestay in Australia or Canada or in Europe, anywhere, honestly, in a Western cultured country, if they noticed that a lot of people had tattoos, and they nodded and they said yes. And so I did still make that point because I want them to know that it doesn't mean that you're bad. Because 9 times out of 10, when we mention tattoos in front of someone, they get very quiet and they avert their eyes. And sometimes you do get the people who have traveled and have been exposed to that culture and they understand, and they're perfectly fine with Joe and I showing our tattoos, and they don't suddenly stop talking to us, and that's great. And it makes us feel welcome, and it's a sigh of relief. But it's really difficult when you're constantly nervous that somebody's gonna see your tattoo and immediately judge you, or potentially get you fired from your job. And also, it's not just onsens that you can't go to. Some Japanese beaches have banned it. Japanese water parks have banned it. Japanese gyms. Joe signed up for a gym and had to sign a piece of paper saying that he didn't have any tattoos and he has to keep his covered at all times. And he's so uncomfortable when he's working out and he has to wear these long sleeves all the time, but otherwise he wouldn't be allowed at any Japanese gyms. There's a lot of speculation that Japan is going to have to change because of the 2020 Olympics, and we'll see if that actually happens, but an entire culture cannot change that quickly just because you're hosting the Olympics, just because a lot of athletes with tattoos are going to be in your country and might be offended. And some of you might be wondering why we bring up this topic and why we kind of push to bring up this topic if we know that it is a controversial thing here and you're supposed to avoid controversy in Japan. And that's kind of simple. We want to be accepted for who we are, and our tattoos are a part of us. I've had my son on my back since I was 17, and it's a tough thing to think that if somebody is gonna look at you and just not judge you by who you are as a person, or even not give you a chance to know who you are as a person. However, that being said, I completely recognize that, you know, racism exists and people are going to judge other people by the color of their skin, and I'm very privileged that this is just something that I have to deal with here and not something that I have to worry about all the time. I'm very aware of that, but it doesn't make it any easier to deal with. Okay, I think I rambled long enough about all of that. I'm sorry, this video was probably really long, but I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please hit that like button. Comment below with the culture shock that I mentioned that was the most shocking to you, because a lot of people have one perspective and one idea of what Japan is, but then when I talk to them about some of these things, they are blown away. Shocked, if you will. But did you know about all of these already? Have you been living in Japan? Do you have any stories to tell about your own experiences? Definitely please comment below. And I am dreading getting comments from people that have never even been to Japan, but they've, watched a lot of YouTube videos, and they are going to say that I have no idea what I'm talking about. So once again, there's a bunch of videos in the description box below that kind of reinforces my experiences and gives you a better, different perspective than just my own on these topics. If you really liked this video, please feel free to share it and hit that subscribe button for more content like this. If you've already hit the subscribe button, make sure to hit the little bell icon so that you get a notification every time I upload a new video, which is once a week. So I will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!